And with that, I want to just turn the floor over to our facilitator, Tamanya.
Hello, thank you so much for that, Jen, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you all are here. We just have a few things to talk through at the top, and then we will get started. But first, I would love all of us who I'm sure we're rushing from this and rushing to that, to maybe just close our eyes and take a few collective breaths. You can also keep your eyes open if that's more helpful to you. But I'm going to close my eyes, and then we're going to take 3 deep breaths in and out. All right, eyes closed, in. Out. In through your nose. Out. One more. In. Out. All right, so I just want to slow down the pace and let us all know that we are here all to witness and learn and grow and have a really great afternoon together. So thank you all for making space for this conversation. So first, to introduce myself, my name is Tamanya Garza, or Tamanya Garza, if you speak Spanish. I am the Director of Community, and I'm glancing over here at my lovely notebook. So if you see me glancing to the side, that's what I'm looking at. Director of Community and Justice Initiatives for PAAL National. I'm also the Philadelphia Chief Rep. PAAL is the Parent Artist Advocacy League. So I hope you're all familiar, but if you're not, you're going to get a great first introduction here today. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Also, I am going to do a quick visual description. I am Latinx, I am Mexican American. I am wearing a beautiful rainbow shirt with red, blue, gold, and black. I'm wearing gold hoop earrings, and my color, this color of my skin is brown like sand. So that is me. I'm also coming to you from the unceded lands of the Lenni Lenape. If you want to drop your own land acknowledgements into the chat, please do. Also, we'll be introducing ourselves a bit later, so if you want to save it for then, that's also perfect. So really quickly, I believe you all received this information, but I just want to go over some session and room agreements, just make sure we're all on the same page and that we're coming all together in a place of warmth and support. So first, make space, take space. That's if you typically take space, try to make some for other people. And if you typically sit back, maybe sit a little forward in this session and let us hear your wonderful voice. Use I statements, speak from your experience, and try to not speak for groups, especially those of us who are BIPOC, who are so often burdened with having to speak for our entire race or ethnicity. Understand there's a difference between impact and intent. Sometimes even during our best efforts to be inclusive and careful, mistakes are made, and that's okay. This is a space of learning and growing as long as we can recognize and be accountable. I would say agree to disagree. And this was also from TCG. Please try to engage even through that disagreement. But I would like to add to that, please keep yourself safe. Please care for yourself as needed. And finally, embrace imperfection. We're all here to learn and grow together, and learning's messy. So let's give ourselves grace and afford that grace to others. Now, in terms of some things from PAAL, I don't know if you can hear it, but I have some jackhammers going on behind me. My neighborhood thought I needed some background music, so I'm celebrating that today. I also have a little one. I don't share much information about their name, age, gender, or what they look like online. So I refer to them as Spider Gwen at their own choosing. If Spider Gwen has an emergency and I need to run to help her save the day, I will do that. But if not, just know that sounds of life are welcome in this session. If you have kids, dogs, elders that you're caring for, please know that should you need to stop and care for them, that is welcome. And should the sound suddenly become part of our lovely soundtrack, that is also welcome. So last thing, just to prime the space, we are here to discuss caregiving, and just so you know, that is elder care as well as caring for children or young people. We are coming together with the understanding that caregiver support is necessary, and that is just, and that is true and correct. If you are still in the place of wondering if caregiver support is necessary or true and just, I'm happy to engage with you, but we're not going to co-opt the space. I can speak with you more online, and I can answer any questions you have. But we are starting with the assumption that caregiver support is a necessary part of working in this industry or any industry. I love an active chat. So I would love it if you drop questions, if you share stories, anything you would like to in the chat. You can also ping me, just me, direct message me, and I'm happy to share anything anonymously. Jen is also going to be assisting me in elevating any questions that I happen to miss. So that is everything. That is everything. So do we have any questions on any of that before we move forward with with the good stuff? All right, great. And I see some land acknowledgements. Thank you so much. All right, so where I would love to start, and especially with a group this size, this is such a lovely size group so that we can all share a little bit if we'd like to. To start, I would love to know a little bit about you, your artistic background, who you work with, what brought you here today, and then also just a short line about specifically why this session interested you. So I will start. Again, my name's Tamanya Garza. I am based in Philadelphia. I'm primarily a director and a producer, and I tend to direct new plays by people of the global majority and women and femmes. So I'm very, very excited to see all this beautiful new work happening and coming through our industry right now. So who would like to be next? Raise our hands. Anyone?
I'll go. Hi, I'm Melissa Folger. My pronouns are she, her. I am primarily a director and I guess a producer as well. I work at Georgia Tech with the student-run theater there on campus, as well as being a freelance director. This session is everything to me because I adopted 3 kids from foster care. And so I trying to work day job and evening job and coordinate with partner on childcare, particularly childcare with people with children who have behavioral and mental health issues, has been a real challenge and something that I need a solution for. That's not just stressing everybody in our family out, which is currently what all it does.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And just to let you know, my spouse is a special education teacher. So while I don't have all the answers, I know at least some of the struggles that go with things like having special needs and having mental health and behavioral issues. So I would be, if there's something you have a specific question about as we're moving through, please feel free to stop me. Who would like to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Andersema. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming in from the land of the Ohlone people, the Chochenyo speaking Ohlone people, which is colonially known as Berkeley, California. I am primarily a freelance director, but also newly into the field of intimacy. So I'm trying to do some intimacy coordination and intimacy direction. I'm also a new board member of Women's Theater Festival, an organization I didn't even really know about until a year ago. And now I'm like the biggest cheerleader. And it's through them that I first found out about this PAAL. PAAL. And I have 3 kids. And I pretty much left theater for 10 years. After I had those kids. So yes, I am still trying to figure out my way back in. I mean, I'm doing lots of things, but yeah, check.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate the break that was not chosen, perhaps chosen for us when it comes to child and caregiving. Anyone who would like to go next? Please, I believe it's Alexa, but correct me if I'm wrong.
You are correct. It's always dangerous to say my name out loud in Zoom meetings. I've learned over the course of the pandemic. I am here in Brooklyn, ancestral homeland of the Lenape people, and I work for Fisher Dax Associates, one of the sponsors for the conference, and I do marketing and business development for them. My background is in stage management and library science. And I don't have children of my own, but I do have two parents who are getting older. And I got to see them for the first time after 14 months, just a couple weeks ago. And it was both wonderful and terrible, because I see now what an impact the isolation of the pandemic has had on them, physically, emotionally, and cognitively. And it sort of drove home their decline. And so I'm here today to learn more about something I'm going to be a part of sooner rather than later.
Thank you for that, Alexa. And I too am a member of the sandwich generation. I have elder parents that I care for and a young child. So we'll certainly be having some discussions about that. Who'd like to go next?
Hi, I'm Bree. I'm Bree Barrett, she, her, hers. I'm on the Lenape land here in Philadelphia. I won't lie, that part of the reason I came is because I think Tamanya is incredible and want to witness what she was offering to everyone. Also because I'm a caregiver. I have a 14-month-old. I have a pandemic baby. And more importantly, I've for a couple of years now, since being introduced to PAAL to PAAL before I was pregnant, before I knew I was going to have kids, I wanted to learn how best we could support caregivers within institutions. I'm an associate artistic director, and I feel like it's our responsibility to figure out standards and practices that we can provide and institute as organizations. And so I'm here to learn from the amazing Tamanya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bree. That was super, super kind. And Bree is also amazing. So thank you for being here. Anyone else?
I'll go ahead. I'm Dory Parkman, she, her pronouns, and zooming in from the land of the people of the Nipmuc and Pecumtuck, which is also in Western Massachusetts. And I am here because I have two very young kids. I have a 5-year-old spirited little girl and a perfect angel little boy who's 20 months old. And I have done everything from nursing at a board meeting to having a 4-year-old run around during a rehearsal. So yes, we're definitely interested in how we can support caregivers of all kinds.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I can't wait to hear more stories about 4-year-olds running around. All right, anyone else? Anyone else like to go?
I'll jump in, audio only while driving. Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Anderson. I'm the managing director at Syracuse Stage. Also, recently separated mom to a 6.5-year. I have to say the separation weirdly has helped out with work-life balance because sometimes she's not there, which is awesome. But coming to you from the world of having had her home for 14 months and doing school at home and recognizing the privilege I have as an administrator to have that flexibility where some of the parents and folks dealing with elder care or spousal care who work in our shops or jobs that cannot be done from home have an unequal burden to bear there. So eager to hear what folks have to say today.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And yes, I feel like we're going to, in this group especially, we're going to have some great conversations. So anyone else? All right. All right. So then I think what I would love to do to move forward is I would love to know who so far in this room, anyone, show of hands, has actually read or knows anything about the new standard of care that Parent Artist Advocacy League published earlier this year. And I am actually going to, okay, what's that? Turn that off. We're having a short situation right here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share. Sorry about that. What we're going to do is we're going to sort of talk through what is on our website, on the PAAL website right now. And it's short. There's only sort of 13 steps or pieces to it. And as we do that, it links to parts of our handbook and things like that. So what I would say is let's just jump into that, and we can, as we have questions, we can stop and we can, talk through them a little bit. But I would welcome you to, as I said, if there's something in particular that I'm not hitting on, please just let me know so I can slow it down. But I'm about to screen share. Let me bring up my. Here we go. So. All right. So can everyone see that? So this is the new standard of care for caregivers. And basically what this is, as you can see, just written right at the bottom, these are 3 pillars of justice, the first 3, and 11 action steps. So this is things that we would love for this new standard of care to become sort of the baseline for theaters by the end of 2021. That is incredibly ambitious and exciting for us, but we would love by the end of 2021, anyone who hasn't established a really clear care plan for caregivers and a plan that includes accountability and transparency would be someone very out of step by the end of this year. So we would love all of you to help us on that journey. But the first thing to talk about is a lot of these, and this is something that some people may be new to in care, in speaking about caregiving, a lot of these steps are rooted in anti-racism. And as many of us have known for many years, or maybe are learning about for the first time because of the racial reckoning that's going on in the country and the world right now, you can't have anti-racism, you can't have inclusiveness in terms of gender or in terms of ensuring that you're bringing in all sorts of people to your organization without having caregiver support. So just to talk through that, the first pillar is, exactly what I just said. You can't have an anti-racist organization without formal caregiver support. Now, there are a couple of pieces that go into making it formal. So the first one is the understanding that caregiver discrimination or neglect in the workplace more powerfully impacts BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color more than any other group. And we have a couple of links right here that we can look at briefly and read through. But basically, I would love to hear anyone's opinion on why they think that is, why caregiver support more powerfully impacts BIPOC individuals.
Well, there's a major financial discrepancy between what white people are earning versus most BIPOC artists and community members in general. I would imagine that the financial hardships are just greater. So yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Bree. That's absolutely true. That's a piece of it. I brought this up to make sure I had it just to show you. Latinx women, for example, Latinx like me, on average make 55 cents on the dollar compared to what a white man is paid. And that's right now today, and that has not changed a great deal in about 30 years. So, so the first thing is BIPOC people have access to fewer resources. We have access to less money means less childcare. It means different kinds of healthcare. It means different kinds of housing. And so our resources are limited just by the nature of the fact that we are earning less as a standard, regardless of education, regardless of how many wonderful internships we've had. So that's a piece of it. Can anyone else think of a reason or something that they know personally about? So another piece of it is our access to healthcare. And this is a piece where we will talk about elder care. So my father passed at the end of last year, and a big piece of what happened was he had a brain aneurysm in June, and he ultimately passed from pneumonia because of poor healthcare within a number of different hospitals, a number of different systems in Philadelphia. And by poor healthcare, I give these examples just to give you a sort of a taste of what it can be to be a Latinx person in our hospital system. Often I spent 4 to 6 hours, and so did my mother, on the phone daily to make sure things were like his breathing tube was being cleaned, CAT scans are being read, x-rays are being taken. And this was a brain injury. Like, this should have been run-of-the-mill stuff, absolutely. And so we are spending so much time defending our humanity and just trying to get what other people are getting as a matter of course, that the burden is more powerful and incredible. So if your organization is another organization that is making me, Tamanya, or an artist like me, or a parent or a caregiver come in and fight for their humanity and make space for themselves and insist that we be treated in accordance with the law, because so often caregiver support is legally required, things like nursing and providing all sorts of things to parents and to caregivers. We're in a position where, again, the burden is so great that we have it keeps us out of jobs, it keeps us out of advancement, and ultimately it makes it so that it's one more fight that we have to fight. And often we just, if it's a matter of life and death, if I'm keeping my father alive or I'm coming to work in an organization that's not caregiver supportive, I'm sure you can guess where I'm going to spend my time. So often that's a big part of it. And again, we have some great links here. I'm going to open this up, and there we go. And we'll go through the website at PAAL a little bit, but there are so many great resources that are attached to numbers. I was also the president of the board of Azuka Theater for 6 years in Philadelphia. And so often when we were making change, especially financial change, it was tied to numbers. It was, do we have the budget for that? Do we know, is that a 1%, is that a 2% line? Is that a 5% change? So this talks to you so much about things like micro stipends, numbers, what caregiver support looks like. Like, when I was preparing for this presentation last night, I was talking to Rachel Spencer Hewitt, the incredible founder of PAAL, and she was saying so often what people run into when you hear caregiver support is there's not a budget, there's not enough money. And she said so often we found success with providing as much or as little as up to $750 per caregiver, or $500, or something in that neighborhood. And often caregivers don't even use all of it. So for a really, it can represent as much as like 1% of a budget or less. You can absolutely provide caregiver support grants or all of these other things, again, supportive areas for nursing, things like that, that really can change the quality of life and who you're welcoming, not just to work in your theater, but also to attend your theater. Because if people do not see themselves represented on stage, they will know exactly where your priorities are, whether you announce that or not. So that is a big piece of it. And we sort of talked through this, but another piece in this first tenet is the comprehensive support of We See You White American Theater. Is everyone sort of familiar with what We See You is? We See You WAT. So so often, I think prior to this very incredible reckoning we're having right now, people would sort of throw up their hands in leadership and say, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. This is so hard. It has now been laid out. There are action steps. There are very clear calls to action. There are very clear transparency and accountability pieces where we're saying these are theaters who have actually done the work, and they're putting things on their website, and they're putting systems in place. So so it exists, and it's out there, and it's free. It's been, all this emotional labor has been done by these incredible artists and these people of the BIPOC community. So take advantage and understand that the time to wait is done, and we're moving into the time for action. Excuse me. So to go on to the second tenet, you cannot have gender parity or inclusion without formal caregiver support. Now, we say gender inclusion because not all people who give birth and not all people who parent are women, and not all people who nurse are women. And so we usually say, pregnant people, or we try to use inclusive language, but those need to go hand in hand. And often as a director, and specifically as a woman who is a director of color, often I hear things like, well, we just can't find the Latinx directors. We can't find the Black directors. We can't find the directors who are Indigenous. And if you can't find them, you really need to be looking at the pipeline that is bringing your people to you. Because how you look for people and where you look for them is also just as important as what you're providing in your organization that makes them feel welcome and supported. There are lots of communities that speak to each other and keep track of poor treatment, and a lot of it's coming to light right now. And so often I think theaters have gotten away with pretending that there just aren't enough people when in fact there just isn't enough support. There are a large number of very talented directors of every gender, but if they can't find their way into the room to even do the interview because you don't have caregiver support and you don't have it formal and they're afraid they have to ask about it, it's not somewhere on your website or somewhere public, then often making that first step is not even possible. I imagine that many of us have been introduced to the concept of intersectionality, but intersectionality, which is I think somewhat misunderstood from time to time, is a piling on of systems of oppression, which leads to a very specific kind of oppression. Latinx women of color who are queer and plus size experience one kind. Those are things that I experience. Black women of color, femmes who are Indigenous, they are all very specific kinds of oppression that they face, and we need to help break those systems of oppression. We really have to understand them and understand that they're unique to each group. And there's a reason that they're unique to each group, because as these stereotypes and these damaging images of these people were created, it was to keep people in line in a very specific way. And so by understanding those tools of oppression, we can break them, and we can create systems that do not include them. And a big part of that is being gender inclusive, understanding that non-binary birthing people and transgender birthing people in almost every aspect of our heteronormative and very cisnormative world experience exclusion. And the birthing process can be, even just going to a doctor can be incredibly draining, can be incredibly scary, and can be deadly. There have been many situations where trans people were not treated or were treated incredibly poorly in ways that led to their death, because we still have a lot of bias in systems, especially medical systems. So to ensure we're not part of that, we want to be really clear, not just that we understand that there are many different genders who take part in the parenting or in the caregiving process, but that we want to support them. And the best way to create support, and really the only way, is with those people in the room. So I'm also an EDI consultant, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And in the past few months, especially, I've heard a lot of people coming to me and saying, our board got together and came up with these great anti-racism steps, and we just want you to look over them and make sure that they're great in this hour-long session. And I say, okay, can you tell me a little bit about the makeup of your board? And it's like, these really invested, excited, cisgender, hetero, white men, and a few women that decided how anti-racism should go. And I will tell you, the first step in breaking systems of oppression is having the most marginalized people in the room to have those conversations. So if you're doing this work, if you're creating systems for caregivers, you need to have those caregivers in the room. You need to pay them for their labor, and you need to understand that everything they give you is a gift. When someone gives you feedback, they're trying to continue their relationship with you. So it's yes and. That's something that Rachel Spencer Hewitt, who is the founder of PAAL, always says, yes and, yes and. And as theater people, we should understand that concept. Anything you are given is a gift, and let's build on it. But let's make sure those people are in the room for the start, because it is not our job at the end of a process that did not include us to come and rubber stamp it so that people can feel good, because that's not real change. That's still rooted in capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy, and we don't want to be any part of that. Here's a great example of an EEO statement. I'm just going to read the first couple of lines. Many of us are probably familiar with the "we do not discriminate based upon," but here is a change that we might want to make. We do not discriminate based upon race, religion, color, national origin, sex, in parentheses, including pregnancy, childbirth, reproductive health decisions, or related medical conditions, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, status as a protected veteran, status as an individual with a disability, genetic information, political views or activity, and other applicable legally protected characteristics. And on the topic of EEO, which is equal employment we also at PAAL, we have so many resources. And in a time this short, it's hard to talk about all of them. But there's three I always want to mention. One is this new standard of care. Another one is our handbook. And if you go up, it's a top level link on our website. You can see it right here on our share page. The handbook is full, absolutely chock full of information from HR executive, professionals, information from parents, case studies. So we actually know how to make these things work, and we can give you information. We have a system where you can actually speak to an HR professional, either as an individual artist or as a theater, and come in and sort of say, perhaps we don't have an HR team that's very robust, but we really have these questions and we want to make sure we're doing it right. So we are there to support you every step of the way. We are there, and I'm actually, we're there to make sure that we're not saying, just go off and do this on your own. We know how to do it. We have budgets for it. We can do everything from here's what I can do for free today, right now, all the way up to if I want to spend $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 to do it. So understand that we're providing a lot of this for you, and we're not just expecting you to know how to do this on your own, because it can be new for so many people. And then to move on to the next one, you cannot support reproductive rights without formal caregiver support. So again, speaking of formal is a plan. Formal is something written down. I'll look at many of these anti-racism plans that are coming out. First of all, anti-racism plans should include caregiver support. But second of all, it should include clear steps. It should include a timeline. It should include the information about who helped you inform this to ensure that there's great representation, and it should include accountability. I've seen some people say we're establishing a fund specifically to support Black artists and Black playwrights. We will do it in this timeline. We will report on it every month, week, or year. So a formalized plan includes all of those steps. Let me just go down here a little bit. We also within, and I think this is really important to land on, the rights of women and people who choose not to have children must also be respected and dignified in all social and professional perspectives, conversations, and practices. So as we're creating this caregiver support, this also includes support for people who make choices that do not include caregiving, and understanding that we are a community that supports caregivers, but that people have to be able to make whatever choices work for them and work for their lives, and that a family is one person and their cats, a family is a person with a spouse, a family is a person living with an elder, a family is a person with children. All of those are families, and we are there to support all of them in every shape or form that they exist, and include language and policies that support both people who have caregiving responsibilities and people who don't or don't yet might in the future. Because as some of us have said, especially people who are caregivers of parents, that's not something we always plan and not something we always know is coming. And if you have these things in place, if you have these systems in place, and this is especially true, I wish the places I worked at had these in place when my father got ill. When someone's parent or child is in crisis, that's not the time to be discussing paid time off. And that's not the time to be discussing how many weeks they can take or this or that. That needs to be in place ahead of time so they can simply push the button and access it instead of trying to build it and fight for it when they're often fighting for the lives of someone they love. So let's make sure this is all in place. We know where it is, we know how to access it, and no one feels like they're going out on a limb. I recently was in a training with Art Equity, and it was talking about when you are complaining about discrimination, you need to have a minimum of 3 people to complain with you, because otherwise you will simply be terminated. You will be fired, you will be undermined in a way that makes you seem like not a good hire, not a good choice or fit for the culture, and you will simply be gotten rid of. And so imagine if a caregiver needed to come and ask for accommodations of some sort, having to find 3 people just to start the conversation. That's exhausting. So it's our jobs to start the conversation as organizations or as artists for them. And I say as artists, I'm a director. So often I actually put into my contract things that will protect people who are caregivers, so that those are not fights that actors or people who work in the shop or even people who are just day hires have to fight for, because they shouldn't have to. If I can have that conversation in my contract, then it's over. And not everyone has that power. And I recognize that that can be incredibly dangerous for some people. But if you are someone who has power that you can share and that you can share safely, that is something that you need to center as much as you can. And I'm going on. Does anyone need me to stop or slow down? Or I'm going to check in the chat.
Could you give us an idea of what that means, adding something like that to a contract? What would
Sure.
what would that look
So
like?
so we all have our contracts. They all have these clauses. Recently, for example, I had a contract that said we will strictly adhere to the schedule and that we will not make any changes without blah, blah, blah days notice. And I said, this doesn't really take into account caregiving or crises. And at the time, my father's in the hospital. So I sort of said, I need language in here that says we will strictly adhere to the schedule, but should we need to make changes, especially regarding crises, health, emergencies, caregiving, I will contact this person. Da, da, da. So they sent it back to me. It said the director will have, and I was like, no. Everyone on the casting crew and all of the actors and all of the administrators will have. And I will tell you, it was a discussion. It was one of these like, does this really belong here? Is this really language you need to have here? And I always say, if you want me in this room, yes, it is. This is non-negotiable. And again, I have privilege. I have power. I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't expect everyone to have that. But again, where I have power, where I can stand up and make caregiving the norm, I do. And so that can go anywhere from having a nursing space to having a system in place so say we're doing a production at a small playhouse and we don't have a lot of understudies. What happens if someone's parent gets sick? What happens if someone's child gets sick? And then we have the system in place. We say, we're going to cancel, we'll reschedule for this rain date, it's already worked out. So then in that moment when I'm holding someone I love and worried about them in the hospital, my first thing is, oh my God, what are we going to do about tech? What are we like? Those things have been put in place and created. And I know in my safety that I can focus on what I need to focus on, which is my family.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And again, that can go not just for contracts, that can go for editing handbooks, that can go for requirements of the board, that can go for requirements of staff, that can go for hiring volunteers to work front of house. Like that can be, you protect anyone where you can. As we have power, we want to protect those of us who are more marginalized. So yes, so that's that one. I'm just checking in here with my pieces. While we talk about choice in caregiving, choice in having a family, choice in all of these things, again, that shouldn't be weaponized. And what we mean by weaponized is sort of like, well, you made the choice to have kids, so this is your fault. This is your problem. Like any other accommodation, we are creating space where we can all work and be our best selves and bring our whole selves to the organization. So, we wouldn't use that word choice in a damaging way for other things that are clearly a choice. You chose to be an actor, you chose to be a director, but at the same time, that is part of who we are and that's part of our whole self. And we accept that as a baseline that we're going to move forward with and not something we're going to hurt or weaponize with. And that gets to this next one. The language such as we have no obligation to support them because they chose it or they chose to have a child is rooted in classism, racism, and misogyny. And they neglect, as it says here, the communal responsibility we uphold based on privilege. So often I talked a few years ago, I was working with, last year actually, or 2 years ago, I was working with PAAL, and we do this thing called International Mother Artist Day. And we honor mother artists often as pictures of artists baby wearing and bringing their kids into the space and doing all these great things, running around in rehearsal. And I was sort of put in charge of it that year, and I was very angry because I don't have any of those pictures. Because when a white man or a white woman brings a child into a space, it's seen as being a wonderful parent. When a person of color does it, it's seen as being unprofessional. And these are biases that exist beyond theater. It's seen as being disorganized. Instead of saying, oh, I want my daughter or my son to see, or my non-binary child to see me work, it's why didn't you get a babysitter? Why didn't so often we only apply that whole it's a choice to the most marginalized members of our community. If a board member came in with a kid, a wealthy white board member, there's a very low chance that anyone would say how unprofessional. It'd be what a great parent you are. And so because that is applied unevenly, we need to keep that language outside of the conversation and understand what it's rooted in. All right, so those are sort of the three pillars. And now we're going to flip over to the action steps, which is a lot of how, how can we do this? How with our budget or with our time or with our small staff of 3 or whatever it is, how can we do this? So before I move forward, are there any more questions? Are there any more comments, stories people need to drop in there? And I talk fast. I usually like to say that at the top of the conversation, because I'm Mexican and I have 5,000 very close relatives. I talk really fast and I move through things really fast. That's a phrase I stole from my mother. But so if ever there's a time where you're like, Tamanya, I didn't even hear the thing you said 5 sentences ago, please feel free to let me know. It's part of who I am and it's something I love about myself, but in presentations, it doesn't always work for me. So moving on.
Tamanya, just to lift up, we're about a half an hour from the end of the session. So I want to give you a time check so that we have time for Q&A.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we will absolutely be saving time for Q&A. So don't worry if you have questions, we will have some space there. So to the first action step, provide caregiver support for all departments and contributors in the organization, regardless of status in employment and hierarchy and family design. So that's sort of what I talked about. So often when we think, especially as theater companies, of caregiver support, we're thinking of like our 4 staff members or, the board or the people that are sort of always with us. This needs to include everyone. And as I said, day laborers, people who are behind the scenes, people who, not just the actors and the staff, everyone. Because we all have needs. And often, as it says in this first line, people who are laborers and who have lower pay likely have multiple jobs. So by creating a humane, inclusive system of caregiving support, we're actually allowing them to take one thing off their plate when they go to the other jobs. I was talking to my mother about this last night on the phone, and I was saying there was a period where I directed a play called Cried Out a few years ago with Simpatico Theater Company, which is how I got involved with PAAL. They had this incredible grant and they made all these wonderful things possible. We could have a 5-day week for rehearsals. We could have kids with caregiving in tech. Like we have all these wonderful things. But at that point, I was working a full-time 9 to 5 at a nonprofit. At night, I would go to rehearsal from 5 to 10, and that was by design. So the parents who were working, but also I had another job that I was working. So I was literally working 3 jobs in 3 cities. And I was privileged. I was a director. I was sort of at the top of the hierarchy chain. But as a person of color, that's what I needed to do. So we have to understand that there's usually, especially for BIPOC in our marginalized communities, disabled people who are not people who are neurodiverse, all of these things, there's just so much more to be done just to pay the bills. We want to create access and support for employment, including but not limited to interview. Oh, sorry, I'm actually gonna turn off for just 1 second. All right, thank you all for that grace. Everything is fine. Spider-Gwen figured it out. Here you go. Here you go, take that. So, sorry, we're just figuring out one more thing. So an example of interview and audition callback support is when I was directing Cry Out, which again was designed for parents to be able to work on it with me. We actually had a number of kinds of caregiving. When people came to auditions, we had the artistic director, a good friend of mine, Allison Heishman, who is incredible, sitting in the audience, in the waiting room. And she sort of said, this is not formal, this is not formal babysitting, but if you would like to drop your little one with me while you go inside or while you run lines or while you warm up your voice, I'm here for that. So it can be as informal as that, or all the way up to when we had some matinees, we had some tech days where we actually had caregivers on site. They were off in another room. They had toys, they had snacks, they had all of that, but we had caregivers that could actually have kids on site. So when we broke for lunch during tech, we could eat a meal of pizza with our kids and we all sat together and we ate. Or, when we had matinees where we had childcare, we also had 2 nursing parents in the room for one performance. So that's okay. So so there's all kinds of support, but just remember interviews, auditions, meetings, anything like that where you can provide childcare or care of any sort is really important, and it gets a lot of the people past that first really big hurdle. So that's one. And I'm going to start moving through these a little bit quickly because obviously this is a babe, I need you to go upstairs. So anywhere you can provide it is very vital and can be very incredibly helpful, especially to the BIPOC members of the community. Provide financial child care support, caregiver funds, stipends as a formal budget line. This is something I talked a little bit about earlier, but in multiple cases, radical financial support for childcare and theater amounts to less than 2% of the annual budget. So if you think of the budget of your theater or even budget of a specific production, I remember when I was the president of a board, we would look at even things like programs. Can we do digital programs? And if we could reshuffle that money into something else, what could we shuffle it into? What would give us a little extra time? So that's there's so many ways. And again, childcare stipends or caregiver stipends, first of all, should be, to meet the legal standard, they should be accessible to everyone. So you're not just going to parents and saying, I'm going to give you an extra $500. You're announcing to everyone, we have a childcare fund, you can apply for it. This is how you apply. And again, you can cap it per person, you can cap the entire fund, but it's incredibly, the weight off a person's mind knowing that fund is available and the difference that will make working with you versus working with another theater can be really life-changing. Like if I knew I had access to even $100 or $200, should I run into an emergency? It's incredible. And if you look at something like an actor's fee or even a day laborer's fee, and you apply childcare to it, I mean, daycare can run $10,000 a year or more easily. So say you're paying someone $18,000 or something, $20,000. How much of that is suddenly gone just for childcare, just for elder care? Elder care as well can be incredibly expensive, especially in-home care. So we have lots of funds, and again, we'll provide all these links. Well, I'm sure we'll be able to get them to you, but we have a lot of numbers, and the best way to defend this decision to any leadership is to bring them numbers, because the things that get created in people's mind, we're spending $50,000, we have to build all these structures. It's so accessible, it's so possible, and it's so accessible, and it is again life-changing for someone who suddenly knows there's a net to catch them if something goes wrong. So the next step, implement family leave structures for administrators and contributing artists. Again, it's not just FMLA. So anything, we always say in PAAL, anything that is the law, it should be the basement, not the ceiling. You should be able to say, yes, we have FMLA, yes, we have family leave, but we're going to add in these more humane, these more family supportive structures that build on top of that. And that take into account, again, that the show must go on, but family is not a distraction. Family is the thing. Family is the reason, so many of us are doing the work we do. So finding a way to let both happen sustainably in advance saves you a lot and saves caregivers a lot of time and effort and energy later. And we also have a lot of templates within the handbook we have a lot of templates of like letters or plans or steps that you need to take so that you don't have to create these things yourself. All right, and I'm just going to go through the rest of them quickly so we definitely have time for Q&A, but abolish the 10 out of 12. I know there have been a lot of conversations lately, and I actually was just part of a panel about a week ago, but we know for a fact that 10 out of 12s are not truly 10 out of 12s. 10 out of 12s are 10 out of 12s for actors. But for stage managers and for shop staff and for stitchers and for costume designers, it can be 16 out of 18. And then they have notes, and then they have to go home and make changes. And if you are someone like, say, a lighting designer who goes from tech to tech to tech, these are not humane schedules. These are not schedules that take into account things like rest or eating or being with your family. So we need to take a really hard look at 10 out of 12 and create a schedule that is humane. And if anyone wants to talk apart from this session, that is something I have been able to achieve in a number of different rehearsals with a number of different formats. So it's doable. It's doable, and the work does not need to suffer. Like if you start from it's possible and work backwards, you can absolutely do it. Implement the 5-day rehearsal week and/or progressive and work and rehearsal hours. This is another one. The thing before was always, well, we can't work from home. How could we work from home? Well, we can do it now. We know we can do it now. So question, does that meeting need to be in person? Question, does that, production meeting need to be on the set? Like, how can we make more space for people to live their lives and have their families with them as needed? During Cried Out, I had a 5-day rehearsal week, and we rehearsed, I believe, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but we tried to space people out so that they were there only 4-ish days a week. And that worked great. I like to talk about the production because it was not only inclusive, but it ended up winning a Barrymore Award, which is a local theater award. And so the work did not suffer. And I can tell you from the people who worked on it and the parents who worked on it with me, it was life-changing, and they took a lot of those practices with them. Support the health and well-being of families through inclusive sick day policies and extend children dependence and through remote work opportunities. This is what I just talked about. We have the infrastructure now. We have all these systems. We have all of these things in place. So let's use them. Let's keep them. Let's let people be in their homes with their families when they need to. Make the workspace or rehearsal space accessible for caregivers and their children dependents as needed. This is the thing that, again, we really focus on in our handbook. Anything from having a box of toys, having a caregiver on site that is paid for by the company, having childcare stipends, having, we also talk about insurance. That's another question I always get. Oh, how can we do this? What does the insurance look like? We can talk you all the way through it. And if you have more questions, we have actual people in PAAL who have done it and can help you implement it. And this also speaks to elder care. My father, before he passed, used a walker and a cane. He had had a number of strokes. And so there are also ways that you can make, we would make spaces where he could sit when he got overwhelmed. He would get overstimulated sometimes, or he would need to sit just because of fatigue. We had special, seating for him, not just in the theater, but also in the lobby. So there are lots of things that you can do to also welcome elders into your space. Because that's why we're all here, because of our ancestors and our elders. They made space for us, so it's our turn to make space for them. Create a plan for accessible remote work options for caregivers who do not feel safe bringing their children into the workspace. There's a great article that I, again, will share as a link later about Nicole Brewer, the anti-racism training expert and artist, talks about she didn't feel safe bringing her children into a space because of racism she had already experienced. So understand that we do not all have the same experience when and if we have already experienced violence in a space, we're not going to bring our children there. So just saying to everyone, oh, you can bring in your kid on Fridays, that's not the same offer for everyone, and understand that. So understand when work from a remote location needs to happen, there may be factors at play that you may not personally understand, but they're incredibly important to that decision. And have those conversations. Have those conversations with leadership to understand that we're not all having the experience at theaters. We're not all experiencing the same microaggressions. So we need to take that into account. Create accessible and compliant spaces as remote working call-in opportunities to support caregivers in a disability community and/or with children dependents with disabilities. So this is where I was talking about, we will get to people with special needs. As someone who has a spouse who has, who works with a lot of children with special needs, when you say I'm providing a caregiver to bring everyone into the space, if someone has a child with special needs, you're not providing a caregiver for them, unless you're providing someone with very special training. And until you fully understand what goes into that care, and it can be diverse and it can change, we need to make sure that as we bring in people, artists, administrators, audience members, we also need to be caring for the people that are in their lives who have disabilities. And again, the best way to do this is to ask the question and pay the people who are doing the labor. So the most marginalized members of our community need to be in the rooms as we create systems to support them. And there are a lot of professional organizations and consultants that can do that too. But we'll look into your community and see who is there, what advocates exist that you can support. And understand, as an intersectionality states, a Black woman of color in a wheelchair is different than a white woman in a wheelchair. And there will be differences for each community that need to be considered. Stop firing pregnant people through AEA loopholes of change in appearance or refusing to adjust work task lists for pregnant people on crew or physical labor roles, backstage and design, stage management, and other departments. First of all, this is illegal. This is discrimination. There's no question about it. Use of a loophole does not make it legally sound. So understand that, first of all, you're opening yourself up, or the company is opening themselves up to a legal challenge by doing this. But also, it is inhumane. It is inhumane to pretend that a pregnant body is something that needs to be ignored or gotten rid of, and that accommodations aren't possible. There are so many accommodations that can be made, even in costuming, that can make people able to work. I was at a board meeting the night before I was due with a 10-pound baby. So I weighed about 700 pounds. I was this big, and I was there at a meeting. A few accommodations had to be made for me, but they were made, and it was possible. So it's possible. We can do it. Educate staff, managers, and representatives on the socioeconomic realities and legal obligations. Again, we have a lot of information about legalities, and it's absolutely important to check in with those, because so often we say, well, I'm a small company, those things don't apply to me. Yes, they do. And lastly, I just want to recognize all of the people that contributed. So here, the wonderful names of many contributors. And I will just kind of stop there and take some questions. I recognize that was a lot. So if there are no questions, we can move to something else.
I had a question. When you were mentioning like establishing language in contracts and handbooks about making space for the possibility of things coming up. Would you offer that? I'm just wondering if that's like an advocacy move also for having support staff in place, like the way that actors have understudies on equity contracts. Should we be advocating for that? That's why we need an assistant director who's not just somebody there learning, but somebody who's like observing in order to step into the role and keep things on track. I don't know. That's just one example I'm thinking of.
Absolutely. I like to say that pretending that we will never have an emergency does not make it so. So pretending that someone will never have, we all know someone in our lives, we all have personally experienced emergencies, so they happen. So not planning for them is just putting extra stress on our staff to solve problems that are our own to solve. So any company should have redundancy, should have a plan where if someone went out for any emergency, caregiver related or not, that they, someone else has the keys and the passwords and the, understands the plan, or that they exist. I worked in social media and digital marketing for a number of years. And when you're doing social media, and it was at a pretty big organization, you have all these editorial calendars and pictures and all these things that multiple people have to have access to, because things happen. Things come up and you have to reschedule things or shuffle things around. So if I could, do that in a social media space and build, and all these wonderful tools exist. I used Airtable, but there are lots out there, project management software and all of that. We can do that and we should be doing that. When we're not doing that, especially because nonprofits are so often made up of femmes and of people who have these caregiving responsibilities, we're just not facing reality. We're not taking into account that this will disproportionately, impact this community. So I agree. Yes, there should be redundancies. There should be spaces where you can sort of hand off, or there should be at least conversations. Like, what if this happened, and how can we build it and bake it into our mission or into our handbook or into something, so that the person is not advocating for themselves in the middle of an emergency. And thank you for that. That's a great question. Anyone else? Fantastic, fantastic. So if we don't have any more questions, I do have just a few more questions for all of you that please answer it as you will. I have two, and you can choose either to answer one or both. The first one is, what are your takeaways? And especially if you ask for something like elder care in particular, did you get what you're looking for? But two, what are your fears? Now, having to go out and implement this, what is a fear that you have?
I guess I'll go. So I can answer both in one. I don't talk about my family situation because I'm afraid it will not get me hired because it will look problematic. And so I am afraid of disclosing for fear that people will go, that sounds like a lot to have to deal with, and that will make it hard for her to work. So let's just not give her the opportunity. So I struggle in silence. And so that's my fear. And so what this is telling me is that I need to get over it. and that we don't have to be perfect, and we need to treat each other as humans and not all act like we're superhuman and we can do it and hold it all together, because I think all of us learned from the pandemic that that's just not attainable anymore. So.
Thank you for that. And I want to say two things. First of all, thank you so much for all you do for your family. You are incredible, and I'm sure every day you are filled with joys and challenges, and we stand in support of that. Two, I would love to offer my email afterwards if you would like, so we can have a discussion and I can pull in a few other people from PAAL, because you shouldn't be doing this alone. Disclosure of anything that you feel might put your job in jeopardy is difficult, and there's absolutely a perception that parents are less reliable or more likely to leave, and that goes double for someone who is dealing with someone with a disability or with mental health needs or with behavioral needs. So like I said, get help. Let's get you some advocacy and some people who can support you in that, because it can be lonely and it can be scary, and it's not about get over it necessarily. It's about get help. Like, let's get you some help, so you feel when you go in there you have all the tools you need and the legal language you need, because there are legal ramifications. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Alexa?
Sorry, I was looking for my unmute button. I'm going to answer them kind of in reverse order. My fear is that I will fail my parents. And I know that I have a lot of research and work I need to do right now. And I also need to have a conversation with them and my sister just to figure everything out. So that's a lot. It's a lot. But the other thing that weighs on me is the systemic nature of everything. And it's difficult to compartmentalize it because it's all tied together. But is there a way, instead of approaching this from we have to fix this situation that exists, is there a way to, in the future, solve it before it happens? Like, is there a way to incorporate this into training for future arts administrators so that they know there's more to running a company than just making the numbers work out and making sure the shows go up and everything is fine, that the human side of it. And my training was not in arts administration. So I don't know what the details are and how it's changed since I was in school, but I don't know. I want a different kind of world, but I don't know how to make it happen. It's very big.
Oh, I'm probably going to get emotional. First of all, if you love your parents, you won't fail them. I just want to speak that into the space. So just know that whatever you do and whatever decisions you are tasked with, you're exactly the right person to make them. And, you know, I had to, at the end, especially in my father's life, not worry so much about what he would want, but what we all as a family would need to get through. So you will be doing exactly what you need to do, and you're exactly the person to do it. And I feel that fear. I feel that fear deeply. But I just want to say that you have all the tools you need, and those you don't have, you know, we will help get to you. And in terms of making a bigger world, again, if we start from it's possible and work backwards, we can do it. So I think organizations like PAAL, conversations like this, we also have a number of trainings, anti-racism training, compassion training, all these trainings at PAAL that we're just trying to push out, you know, at this incredible, phenomenal pace, because so many of us are volunteers or are new to our positions. So I think that we are trying to make that, but I would say in the spaces where you exist, as much as you can, demand it, insist on it. Again, go back to where you work and look at the handbook, look at your contracts, look at all those things and question. And if you can't do it yourself, invite us in so we can help, or other advocacy, your unions, you know, put pressure on them and say like, why don't we have caregiving centered? Why don't we have anti-racism centered? Okay, really. So I would say that's how we change it, but absolutely we start in education, because so often education is where we form our ideas. And if they're not well formed there, we get this really static idea that's usually centered on patriarchy and the white male experience of what theater should look like. And all of us are here to change that. And that's a lot to carry, to make space for ourselves, but we can do it. And the only change that has ever been made is by, you know, is by people having to, you know, to paraphrase that quote, a small group of very interested people taking it onto themselves. So again, happy to share my email and to put you in touch with other people from PAAL, but and just have a personal conversation if you're interested in that. So anyone else? But thank you for that.
I was having the crazy connection that it's like, you know, 150 years ago, oh, well, how would we ever run our business on a 70-hour work week? These workers have to work 70, 80 hours. How would anything work if they had more than one day off a week? Like, we're so, oh my gosh, our industry. But my takeaway is I am so grateful that this plan exists. How incredible that all this work has been done. Thank you so much. And I feel like it's been laid out, the dream's been laid out. So it's achievable. We will get there. We will all create art under more humane circumstances.
I agree. And I think we will look back in maybe 5 or 10 years and be so moved that we had to have these conversations, but hopefully at that point, people will be having them, you know, for and without us before we get there, and we can walk into an affirming space instead of having to build it ourselves. But at this point, we're in the building stage, so that's what we're doing. Anyone else? If I know we're about a minute away from finishing, so anyone else? All right, well, I want to thank you all for being here and for all the grace. I see a thank you to all of you. And also I would love it. First of all, we have our Black Motherhood and Parenting new play festival coming up tonight. It just started, it runs through June 14th. So please check that out. Check out our website. It's paaltheaterre.com. I don't know if we have ability to send links afterwards, but if we can, I would love to. And also, you know, talk about this. Go on your social media, talk to your friends, plan a meeting, text a friend. The way we make difference is by setting fire to this world that does not support us and building something new. So talk about it, and talk about it in a way that you feel supported and safe. You know, don't go out on limbs, but talk about it and make change. And you know, let's do this together because we can. Thank you all so much for being here. We're in our last minute, so I would love it if we could just end with 3 deep breaths as we did. And for everyone speaking and everyone who didn't, I value you all. So we could not have made this space without you. So if you don't mind, let's close our eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Right, in, out. In, out, and in, out. And thank you, of course, to TCG for making this space for us. And, you know, we couldn't do it without these platforms. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tamanya, for that amazing presentation, the amazing work of PAAL, and, you know, just for the really palpable care and support with which you held this space. Really appreciate you. Lots of love for you all. Thanks, everyone. I dropped a link to a session feedback form. If you don't mind clicking on that and just giving us a few words about what you thought of this session, that would be really helpful. And we will see you soon. Thanks so much. Be well, everyone.
Yeah, take care.